The rain hadn't let up all morning. It slid in cold sheets across the city sidewalks, soaking the streets and hammering the metal roof of the old bus stop where Elijah Rose sat motionless. He didn't flinch when a gust of wind cut under the shelter. He barely blinked. His military dress uniform, faded at the shoulders but carefully pressed, clung to him like something sacred. At 38, Elijah carried the weight of 2 combat tours and more scars than anyone could see. His leg, bound in a rigid black brace, stretched stiffly out in front of him. Crutches rested against the bench like worn rifles set down after a long march. He looked up at the courthouse across the street. Gray stone, tall windows, heavy doors. That building hadn't been made for men like him, not the broken, not the forgotten. He shifted slightly, wincing at the sharp pull in his lower back. It had taken him nearly 2 hours to get here. The subway elevator was out again. The ramp on the bus wasn't working yesterday. The nearest drop-off point for paratransit was 3 blocks too far to walk. He had tried to come before, 3 times, but the system made it nearly impossible for a man who moved like him. Today, he forced it anyway, because he had to. The charge: contempt of court. Missed appearances over a few unpaid parking fines he'd tried to contest but never got. The chance. His phone buzzed. A message from Leah. "Just get through it. I'll meet you after." Elijah allowed a faint smile. His little sister, a night shift nurse with tired eyes and a voice that always steadied him. She'd stayed up past her shift just to be here for him. She always did. He exhaled and rose carefully, leaning into his crutches. 1 step, then another. The pain in his hip throbbed with every movement, but he'd learned not to fight it, just move through it. That's what the war taught him. Keep going. People passed without noticing. No one offered help. No one held the door. He pulled it open himself, slowly, carefully, and stepped inside. The courthouse swallowed him whole, echoing with the tap of his crutches and the soft slap of wet boots on tile. The air smelled like paper and varnish and something colder underneath. What Elijah didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that this building wasn't just unwelcoming. It was about to prove it never truly saw him at all. The courtroom was warmer than the rain-soaked street outside, but somehow it felt colder. Elijah paused just inside the doors, letting his eyes adjust to the dim wood-paneled walls and flickering overhead lights. He recognized the look of the place. It reminded him of the base briefing rooms overseas. Formal, rigid, indifferent. Except back then, people looked you in the eye. Now no one looked up. Judge Marlene Huxley sat high behind the bench, her black robe pressed sharp, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun that didn't dare shift. She was known in this city, feared even. A former military wife turned courtroom, iron wall. She'd buried a husband in uniform and hardened herself ever since. They said she respected soldiers, but only the ones who didn't stumble. Elijah's name was called. He moved slowly down the aisle toward the defendant's table, his crutches clicking softly against the marble floor. Every eye that bothered to follow him quickly looked away again. At the prosecutor's table sat Kyle Denton, young, polished, proud of it. He didn't stand when Elijah arrived, just gave a lazy glance over his file and smirked, like this case had already bored him. "Mr. Rose," Judge Huxley began, her voice firm and clipped. "You stand before this court charged with contempt for failure to appear 3 times. Elijah cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I tried." She held up one hand, sharp as a blade. "This is not a place for excuses." He swallowed, his mouth was dry, his back ached. "I've served in Afghanistan. You were issued summons," she snapped. "You ignored them." "I couldn't walk the distance. The transit stops weren't accessible. The elevators." Judge Huxley didn't flinch. "You found a way today, didn't you?" He froze. "I find no satisfaction in disobedience wrapped in patriotism," she added, her voice cool. "Service does not exempt one from accountability." Kyle Denton didn't speak. He didn't need to. The smirk on his face did the job. To him, this wasn't a courtroom. It was a conveyor belt. Elijah glanced at the jury box. Mostly white, middle-aged. One man looked half asleep. A woman in the back rubbed her temples. No one met his eyes. In the gallery, someone coughed. Others scrolled quietly through their phones. A few whispered, barely noticing the man on crutches trying to defend himself. And that was the moment Elijah felt it. Not anger, not even shame. Just small, like he didn't belong in this place, even though he'd bled for the right to stand in. He shifted in his seat, back straight despite the pain, voice low but steady. "I didn't come here today to be excused," he said softly. "I came here because I still believe in what this place is supposed to mean." But the silence that followed didn't feel like belief. It felt like dismissal. And for a man who had once stood tall in uniform, that, more than anything, was the deepest wound of all. There was a stillness in the room, not the respectful kind, the kind that settles in when no one wants to be involved. Judge Huxley leaned slightly forward in her chair, hands folded over the bench, her voice as firm as ever. "Before I issue your sentence, Mr. Rose," she said, "you will stand unaided." The room shifted. Even Kyle Denton blinked, surprised. "To show respect to this court," she added, as if the weight of her words hadn't just landed like bricks. Elijah stared at her for a moment, not sure he'd heard her correctly. "Your Honor," he began, voice calm but uncertain. Her tone sharpened, like steel. "You wore the uniform. I assume you remember what respect looks like. This courtroom expects no less than what you once gave your country." His fingers tightened around the grip of his crutches. He said nothing, because what was there to say? Pain flared through his hip as he shifted in his seat. His left leg, the one reconstructed after a roadside bomb outside Kandahar, had been swelling since morning. The brace squeaked softly with each small adjustment. His doctor had warned him months ago. Standing unsupported could tear through what little stability he had left. But the judge didn't blink. She stared at him like he owed her something. Across the room, someone cleared their throat. Kyle Denton glanced down at his file and shifted uncomfortably as if trying to disappear behind the paperwork. Elijah took one slow breath, then another, and then he began to rise. He pushed the crutches aside. One clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the chamber like a shot. He placed both hands on the edge of the table, bracing himself. Then slowly, painfully, he lifted himself. His right leg strained beneath him, muscles trembling with the effort. His left, stiff and uncooperative, shook violently. He straightened his back with effort, shoulders squared the way the military had trained him. His jaw clenched so tight, you could see the muscles rippling under his skin. For a few excruciating seconds, he stood wobbling, breathing hard. His arms hovered slightly out to the side, as if willing himself to fly. The room had fallen dead silent. No one moved. No one dared speak. Judge Huxley remained motionless, watching from the bench, expression unreadable. Then his knee gave. It happened in a flash. The left leg twisted inward with a terrible, unnatural jerk. His body crumpled. His hip hit first, then his shoulder, then the sharp crack of his head striking the polished floor. A woman in the back gasped. The sound of flesh on tile echoed like thunder. His remaining crutch skidded out across the floor. "Elijah!" a voice shrieked. The doors at the rear of the courtroom burst open. Leah Rose, breathless, rain-soaked in her nurse's scrubs, came running forward. "Elijah, don't move. Don't move!" she cried, falling to her knees beside him. He groaned softly, eyes fluttering, one hand twitching as he tried. God help him to push himself up again. "No," Leah whispered, tears already sliding down her cheeks. "You don't have to. It's over. You don't have to prove anything." But Elijah wasn't trying to prove anything, he just didn't know how to stay down. He had fought to stand his whole life, on foreign soil, in VA waiting rooms, in parking lots that didn't have ramps, in job interviews where they looked past the man and only saw the limp. To him, standing wasn't ceremony. It was survival. "Help him," someone muttered from the gallery. The bailiff hesitated, glancing toward the judge. She didn't speak. He moved anyway, kneeling beside Elijah, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Sergeant, don't force it. Let us help." Elijah's lips moved, barely audible. "I'm okay. but his body trembled. Leah reached for his hand, wrapping her fingers tightly around his. "You're not okay," she whispered. "And you don't need to be. Not for them." The room, for the first time, began to shift. A few jurors looked down in shame. A man in the front row shook his head slowly. Even Kyle Denton had lost his smirk, and Judge Huxley, she still hadn't spoken. Her eyes locked on Elijah, but something in them had changed. Not softened, no, but fractured, like someone realizing too late that the power she wielded had done something irreversible. Leah's voice filled the silence. "He served this country," she said loudly, not looking up. "He gave pieces of himself most of you wouldn't even know how to carry. And now this is what you call justice?" No answer came. Just the sound of Elijah's shallow breaths echoing against the cold marble floor. Just the sound of a room realizing what it had allowed. And just outside the tall windows, the rain fell harder, pounding the glass like something that refused to be ignored. For a long moment there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Just the broken body of a soldier lying crumpled on the cold courtroom floor, and the echo of silence so thick it pressed against the skin. Elijah Rose didn't move. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. His hand remained tangled in Leah's, the tremor in his fingers speaking where his voice could not. Across the room, people stared at the floor, at the judge, anywhere but at Elijah, until one man stood. Back row, left side. A tall black man with gray in his beard and one empty sleeve tucked neatly into his coat. A veteran. The ribbons on his chest had faded from sun and years, but the pride in his stance hadn't. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just stood for Elijah, and then slowly, another man stood, and then another. No chants, no slogans, just quiet, deliberate defiance. A wall of veterans rose row by row, men and women of all races, shapes, and ages. Some leaned on canes. One gripped the edge of his seat to steady himself. Another wiped his eyes and squared his shoulders. Even a young Marine with fresh scars across his cheek stood from the gallery, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Kyle Denton, the prosecutor, looked stunned. His legal pad slipped from his hand. The jury box, too, began to shift. First a woman in her 60s, clutching a service pin on her blazer. Then a middle-aged man with a crew cut and watery eyes. By the end of it, nearly 2/3 of the jurors were standing, not in protest but in witness. Not to a crime, but to a shame. And then she appeared. An elderly black woman stepped slowly into the aisle, each step steady, deliberate. She wore a dark church coat. Her shoes clicked softly against the tile. Her hat was simple, her back straight. On her chest, 6 small medals pinned just above her heart. She stopped in the center of the room, right beneath the judge's bench. Her voice trembled, not from weakness but from the force she held back. "My father died in Korea," she said, looking straight at Judge Huxley. "He came home in pieces. They wouldn't even give him a flag for his casket." Her eyes narrowed. "Now, you shame his son?" Judge Huxley's face froze. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, but nothing came. The woman stepped back. The silence somehow grew heavier. Behind her, dozens now stood, veterans in uniform, civilians in street clothes, a mother holding a folded flag in her arms like a baby, a young man with PTSD written in his posture, eyes rimmed in red, all standing, all still, and at the center of it all on the floor was Elijah Rose. Leah knelt beside him, brushing damp hair back from his forehead, whispering soft reassurances only he could hear. Her body shook, but her eyes never left the judge's. She wasn't crying anymore. She was watching, like a sister, like a witness, like a warning. Judge Huxley shifted in her seat. She wasn't used to this. She was used to silence meaning control. But this silence had changed shape. It wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the people standing now in every row and corner of the courtroom. Her fingers gripped the edge of her bench, but her voice, The voice that had once thundered in this room had no place here now, because no gavel could silence what had just risen. And as Leah gently wiped a tear from Elijah's cheek, she leaned close and whispered, "They see you now." Elijah's eyes blinked open, barely. His lips moved, but no sound came. He didn't need to say anything, because for the first time in a long time he wasn't alone. The silence held. No one moved. No one dared. Judge Marlene Huxley sat frozen behind the bench, her fingers still curled tightly around the edge, as if authority could be gripped like a weapon. But that grip had slipped. Around her, the courtroom no longer felt like hers. It belonged to the veterans standing in silent defiance, to the jurors with tear-streaked cheeks, to the gallery that had become a chorus of conscience, and to the man on the floor, the one she had demanded to stand. Slowly she rose. No gavel, no closing word, just the sound of footsteps as she stepped down from her throne of polished wood and privilege. Her robe rustled against her heels as she moved across the courtroom floor step by step, toward the man she had ordered to rise. Each step stripped away more than fabric. It stripped illusion. When she reached him, she did not speak. Not at first. She reached up and unclasped the top of her robe. Her fingers trembled, but she pulled the garment from her shoulders and let it slide from her arms. She laid it neatly on the ground beside her, and then she knelt before Elijah rose. Leah gasped softly, a hand covering her mouth. Even Kyle Denton, speechless until now, lowered his head. Huxley's knees creaked as they met the floor. The tile was cold, but she didn't flinch. She looked at Elijah, not the crumpled body, but the man, and finally, she spoke. "I failed you," she said, her voice low and stripped of all pretense. "I failed what justice is supposed to mean." Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She knew better. This wasn't a moment for redemption. It was reckoning. "I saw your file," she continued. "I saw a name, a case number, not the man, not the soldier, not the brother. Not the body that's carried pain most of us couldn't imagine." She swallowed hard. "I demanded strength when what I should have offered was dignity." A murmur passed through the gallery like wind through dry grass. An older white woman in the audience wept quietly, hands clasped over her heart. Her husband's veteran pin glinted softly in the courthouse light. Judge Huxley lowered her head, not to be seen, but to show she finally saw. Leah's hand stayed on. Elijah's, but now her tears came freely, not from pain but from something deeper. Release. Elijah's breath was shallow. He turned his head slowly, and with every ounce of strength he had left, he raised his hand. Not high, not dramatic, just far enough to rest it gently on Huxley's shoulder. No words, just a trembling palm resting where judgment once sat. And in that silence, deeper than any ruling, louder than any verdict, the courtroom changed forever. Because power had finally knelt before pain. It started with a single clip. Grainy phone, footage from the back row of the courtroom. A trembling man trying to stand. The crash of his body against the floor. A judge removing her robe, kneeling, and then just silence. No speeches. No speeches were needed. By the end of the day, it had been viewed over 5 million times. By morning, 50. The hashtags hit like wildfire. He couldn't stand. Let veterans rest. Across racial lines, political divisions, city borders, something resonated, because it wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about every soldier who came back broken, only to be judged by a system that never saw the burden they carried. Videos flooded the internet. Black veterans in New Orleans sitting in wheelchairs on their porches, staring into the camera saying, "We see you, Elijah." White veterans in Ohio, tears in their eyes, saluting the screen. Latinx vets in San Antonio, Asian American Marines in Seattle, women who had served and been dismissed, sons of those who never made it home. One woman, standing in front of her father's gravestone, whispered into her phone, "He fell over there." Elijah fell here, and both were for us. Even high school students picked it up. He couldn't stand became a rallying cry, painted on murals, printed on shirts, scrolled across classroom whiteboards. College campuses began holding forums. What does honor really look like? Why do we shame the broken? When did silence become stronger than rage? TV hosts who normally never covered veterans' issues suddenly opened their segments with Elijah's name. Veterans organizations held candlelight vigils. Local city halls lit up their buildings in muted blues and grays, the colors of service and scars. And in one quiet corner of the chaos, a man resigned. Kyle Denton, the prosecutor, didn't hold a press conference. He just typed a short email and left the office that morning. No one asked him to, no one needed to. The footage had shown more than his smirk. It had shown his silence, his apathy, his complicity, and the nation had watched, because for the first time in years, a courtroom hadn't just ruled on a man's guilt, it had reflected a country's conscience. And that conscience, long dormant, long bruised, had begun to stir. The house was quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath as Leah moved carefully through Elijah's small living room, collecting the pieces of his scattered world. His crutches rested beside the couch. His uniform jacket folded neatly sat on the back of a worn chair. The television played silently in the background. Another newscast. Another headline. Veteran who fell in court becomes voice for thousands. But Elijah wasn't watching. He sat by the window, lost in thought, one hand resting gently on the leather-bound journal that rarely left his side. Leah knew that journal held more than memories. It held pain and promises and names that hadn't come home. As she cleared the coffee table, she noticed a small metal box tucked beneath the stack of medical forms and newspaper clippings. Something about it felt old, or sacred, like it hadn't been touched in years. "Elijah," she asked softly. "What's this?" He looked over, eyes tired but kind. "My deployment keepsake box," he said, voice low. "Haven't opened it since." His words trailed off. Leah hesitated. "May I?" He nodded once. She gently lifted the lid. Inside were worn dog tags, a photo of a younger Elijah in desert fatigues smiling with his arm around another soldier, a fragment of burnt cloth, a folded piece of paper sealed in plastic. On the front, scrolled in black ink, "For Elijah if you made it, Sergeant Thomas Vega." Leah froze. Elijah's eyes locked onto the name. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Thomas Vega. The man who had pulled him from the fire, dragged him across broken ground, shielded him from the blast that had taken Vega's life and nearly Elijah's leg. With trembling hands, Elijah took the letter. He peeled back the plastic, unfolded the page and read, "Elijah, if you're holding this, then I didn't make it, and you did. Good. That's how it was supposed to go. I need you to promise something, brother. Don't disappear. Don't carry guilt like it's some badge of honor. Don't shut down just because your body hurts. You're not done. If you live, then live for all of us who didn't. Speak. Walk when you can, crawl if you must, but don't stay silent. We didn't die for silence. You made it out. That means something. Make it mean something." Elijah's shoulders shook. The letter slipped slightly in his grip as tears blurred the ink. Leah sat beside him, her hand on his back, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. After a long silence, Elijah reached for his journal. He flipped to a clean page and with slow, careful strokes he wrote, "He didn't die for silence." Then beneath it, "Neither will I." The page absorbed the ink like soil drinks rain. Outside, the wind picked up again, softly, and somewhere in the distance church bells rang for no reason at all. But Elijah heard them, not as a sign of mourning, as a call. No cameras, no speeches, no headlines, just wind whispering through marble. The gates of Arlington opened quietly that morning. No motorcades, no fanfare, only a black van pulling slowly up the curved path past rows and rows of white headstones, each standing like sentinels in eternal formation. Elijah Rose sat in the passenger seat, dressed in his faded military blues. His medals weren't polished, his shoes were worn, but his presence felt like thunder held inside stillness. Leah pushed his wheelchair gently across the trim grass. Her hand, light but firm, rested on his shoulder as they passed stone after stone. Some had flowers, most did not. They reached a small section near the back. Elijah motioned for her to stop. He pulled a folded cloth from his lap, revealing 4 red poppies. Simple, bright, blood-colored. One by one, he placed them. First at Bobby's grave, then Marcus, then Angela, then JT. He paused at each name, fingers brushing lightly over the etched lettering. "These aren't headstones," he murmured. "They're bookmarks." Their stories were interrupted, not ended. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the nearby flags. In the distance, a lone hawk circled silently. Leah stepped back, giving him space. Elijah took a deep breath and then, with the weight of every fallen friend behind him, he spoke. Not loudly, not theatrically, but with reverence. "This isn't a memorial," he said. "This is a promise." He turned his eyes toward the rows stretching endlessly in every direction. "A promise that we remember. A promise that we speak their names. A promise that what they gave doesn't vanish into granite and grass." The words hung in the air like mist. No music played. No officials nodded. Only the wind responded, gently, respectfully. Leah, now standing a few steps behind, placed her hand over her heart. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She stood, still, like the stones around her, bearing witness. Elijah remained silent for several minutes, head bowed, eyes closed. In that stillness, every memory he carried, the desert heat, the radio static, the laughter, the screams, the silence after, passed through him like a tide. He opened his eyes slowly and looked at the poppies. "You all deserved more than this," he whispered, "but this is a start." He gave a slow, deliberate salute, sharp, unwavering, the one gesture his body still performed without compromise. And in that moment, beneath a sky untouched by applause or performance, Elijah Rose fulfilled a duty no one had assigned him: to remember, to promise, to carry the stories that would have been lost. The bill passed quietly. No dramatic debates. No grandstanding speeches. Just a line of text added to federal code, born not from politics but from conscience. The Rose Bill. No court in the United States shall compel a disabled veteran to stand during proceedings as a show of respect. The vote wasn't close. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They all said yes. And across the country, courtrooms shifted, judges retrained, protocols rewritten. But the ripple didn't stop at law books. Law schools, from Columbia to community colleges, began updating their curricula. New sections on judicial empathy, case studies labeled the Elijah Rose precedent. Future judges now studied not just constitutional law, but moral responsibility. In one small town in Missouri, a 9th-grade girl named Talia Jackson wrote an essay titled "The Man Who Fell So We'd All Stand Straighter." She had never met Elijah, had no family in the military, but she saw his story and it stayed with her. Her words won the statewide contest. Her voice, like Elijah's, made others pause. And that pause, it spread. Veterans Day wasn't just a date on the calendar anymore. Towns began hosting year-round community talks. Veterans sharing their stories in libraries, schools, and even barbershops. Not just about medals, about memories, about scars. Elijah didn't attend most of them. He wasn't interested in being famous. But his presence was everywhere, in the tone of the conversation, in the silence before a story, and in the way people now leaned in instead of looking away. He had changed, the narrative, not with anger but with endurance, and a nation, once too distracted, too divided, had begun finally to wake up. The courthouse looked the same. Same brick, same windows, same polished marble halls, but the front steps had changed, forever. A crowd had gathered under the morning sun, quiet, but expectant. No fanfare, no celebrity appearances, just families, veterans, students, and a few curious passers-by, drawn in by something they couldn't quite explain. At the base of the courthouse steps stood a bronze, cloth draped over, a sculpture. Leah stood beside Elijah, who now used only one crutch. They said he didn't have to come, but he had to, because this moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to every man and woman who had knelt and been overlooked. Every veteran who had given more than they could explain. A local official stepped to the mic. No speech, just 6 words. This is for the ones unseen. The cloth was pulled back, and there it stood, a life-sized bronze statue of a black soldier, kneeling. One knee down, one hand gripping a pair of crutches planted firmly like swords driven into sacred ground. His head was lifted, his face carved with pain, but also pride. He didn't look defeated. He looked unbreakable. Beneath the statue, etched in clean, simple lettering, "They didn't see you, but we do now and forever." The crowd stood in silence. Elijah's breath caught, not because it was him, because it wasn't just him. It was Bobby, Marcus, Angela, JT, Thomas Vega, and every name that never made it home, or made it back invisible. A little boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Daddy, what does it mean?" The father knelt beside him, eyes locked on the statue. "It means dignity, son," he said softly. "That's what dignity looks like." The boy looked up at the bronze soldier, wide-eyed, and nodded, like he understood something he didn't yet have words for. Elijah didn't speak that day. He didn't need to. He stood beside the statue, placed one hand gently on the crutches carved in steel, and closed his eyes. For a moment, the courthouse behind him didn't feel like a place of judgment. It felt like home. The porch creaked gently under their weight. Elijah sat in his old wooden chair, its paint chipped and fading, just like his uniform jacket hanging by the door. Leah settled beside him, barefoot, 2 mugs of tea warming their hands. The sky was melting into gold. Out beyond the fields, the last light of day stretched across the horizon like a quiet promise. Birds whispered through the trees. The world felt softer than usual, like it too had finally exhaled. Inside, the TV murmured, news anchors still replaying old clips, interviews, sound bites. Somewhere in the background his name flickered on the screen again. But Elijah wasn't watching. He was watching the sky. Leah followed his gaze. "You didn't stand alone," she said, breaking the silence. He looked over at her, lips curved in a tired but content smile. "No," he said, voice low. "None of us ever did." A long pause passed between them, not empty, just full of the things words never quite capture. Shared grief, shared pride, shared survival. Elijah leaned forward, bracing himself, with his good leg. His body ached, it always would, but tonight it didn't matter because tonight he felt whole. He raised a hand slowly, carefully, and saluted the horizon. The gesture was crisp, clean, etched into muscle memory. Then, barely above a whisper, he spoke. "I still see them. I still stand." The wind stirred gently through the porch rails. The sky darkened, but it wasn't lonely. Leah didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply reached out, rested her hand on his, and together in the quiet, they sat. 2 souls bound by memory, watching the sun set on a country slowly learning how to remember its own. Not with noise, but with dignity, with truth, with one man's final whisper carried on the wind.